One of my previous bosses, Akar Patel, around I think 15 years ago, when he recounted a story when he was in Afghanistan covering the war. The US had just invaded, I think, Afghanistan back then, and he had met a couple of RAW agents and RAW officers, and he told me that they were, your middle-aged uncles basically. They weren't, you can't look at them and be like, "Acha, he must be an intelligence agency." He's like a normal Indian uncle, pot-bellied, and that's how they actually are like in real life.
You can't blame Bollywood and Hollywood and all the other woods for only focusing on the glamorous, dangerous, dark aspects of both these professions. But it has always occurred to me that intelligence agents are depicted the very same way that journalists are depicted. First of all, we've got to accept, even if unhappily, that most intelligence work is filing cabinets and, work at a computer and, very, very mundane everyday tasks and a huge amount of kagas and paperwork and stuff. Very, very little intelligence work is genuinely, people-facing, field work. Most of the time, organizations like RAW, certainly the CIA, MI6 sounds really sexy, but it's full of research and analysis people as well. At least RAW is honest about what it does. Are people trained to take all those copious amounts of information and inputs to find a needle in a haystack, give it some kind of definition, distill what you called actionable intelligence out of it? The Uri attack was caused by two terrorists. Yep. Two guys. The Pulwama attack was caused by one guy in a car. Are you going to be able to keep eyes on everything? So it's easy to say intelligence failure, but one must also qualify what intelligence failure means in that instance. This government has seen sense in being disruptive about the secretive world of covert operations and using it for strategic messaging.
Hello and welcome to the 46th episode of Inner Defense. Hi Shiv, how are you? How's your week been?
It's been a US election week with so much to talk about, including in our new episode, but finally out of that entire American whirl.
Yeah. We are. But I think it'll come up again. I think,
till January, I don't think there's going to be anything else in the air.
Yeah.
Briefly punctuated by the Maharashtra elections. But yeah, it's all Trump from here.
Yeah, you have him appointing a set of his top leaders right now, and it'll be interesting to watch who will be the ones that will kind of lead the front when it comes to the US defense, military, and intelligence, which is going to be a topic of our discussion today. Specifically, Indian intelligence and some recent questions that have kind of been raised because of some controversy that have happened that also involved by the United States. In this episode, we'll kind of focus on what exactly happens at an intel agency. What is this world of intel all about? Because for almost everybody, because of this the nature of the job. I mean, you have no official records really available to kind of go through the kind of work they do. So you have a lot of mystery, mystic, and a lot of stories floating about on the internet, nothing that you can confirm. And obviously you have all these glamorous movies and TV shows being made, James Bond type, that kind of, take it to another level altogether. But kind of, I think at the end of the day, miss what really is the actual day job, so to speak, of an intel officer or intel agency. So we'll get into that. But before we do some context setting, because we'll obviously be coming back to this controversy a bit later on this episode as well. But the controversy surrounding an alleged plot to assassinate Gurpatwant Singh Pannun on US soil. I want to stay away from the Canada controversy completely right now, because for that we kind of really have what's sort of the motive behind Canada's allegation, which is the domestic politics over there. Justin Trudeau and his party's need for Khalistani support to prop up their own regime that has led to allegations against India. Allegations for which they themselves have admitted they don't really have hard proof, they only have intelligence. That's quite opposite when it comes to the US, which has actually gone to court against Indian nationals, two of them, naming them on record and saying that one, at least, officer from RAW, the External Intelligence Agency of India, was involved in a plot to try to assassinate Gurpatwant Singh Pannun. We'll avoid Pannun right now. We don't want to get into that figure who's kind of ludicrous in a sense, but the reason I'm talking about this context setting is what I don't get is the reason or why the US chose to go public. Because when it comes to matters like these, usually you have governments kind of dealing with them, in the back end. They'll have discussions, they'll have negotiations, there'll be some give or take. You give us this, we will give you that, and kind of end of story. It doesn't really come out into the public domain. But here you have the US Department of Justice going to court, making the allegations public. And there's also been some talk that the US may have been the one that kind of, push Canada into making these allegations in public and kind of make this whole controversy around India. The allegation basically is that a raw officer in India contracted some international gangster to assassinate Pannun. This gangster then contacted somebody who was actually an informant for an US agency, who then led that gangster to somebody else who was actually an undercover officer for a US policing agency, and that's how the whole plot was unraveled. The US claims to have some recordings and proof of communication, etc., etc., etc. We'll get into the details a bit later on this episode. My core question is, why did the US do this? It's like the India-China standoff. We'll discuss the agency involved, like the Indian Army, in this case RAW and perhaps the IB. We'll discuss there may be failings. We'll discuss the successes, obviously, which we've been doing with the India-China standoff. But the core question of why China began the standoff in the first place is not something that we've really been able to understand or answer. In this particular case, what do you think are the US's motivations?
Well, look, we're talking about two countries which are democracies, two countries, India and the United States, that are have a defining relationship of the 20th and the 21st century. Two countries that share a great many things, including the way their governments are structured, huge cultural exchanges, vast, large militaries, big responsibilities in their regions and globally. But most people were, surprised by the kind of visceral nature of this entire Pannu case when it came out. And I think a lot of people have been wondering why it happened. It's fun to dissect it now from from the perspective of an incoming Trump regime. But let's be very clear about one thing. All countries, or let me rephrase that and say all countries with the power to do so, do always maintain strategic assets or intelligence assets against other countries that could even be friendly. They certainly maintain them against countries that are adversarial, but they also do it against countries that are friendly, because you never know how things could go in the future. Now, my personal view of this is that India and please mark my words carefully, because this is not chest thumping, but India's increasing importance in the region, on the world stage, India's increasing assertiveness, in the international order, the enormous power of the Indian economy, the power of the Indian military, as has been demonstrated on the line of actual control, India's visibly increasing influence way beyond just a kind of Asia bubble, is something that is very clearly recognized by countries around the world, most notably China and the United States. We'll keep Europe and Canada out of this because they're not immediately relevant to what we're talking about. Canada even less so. So while this relationship between India and the United States has been burgeoning, and for good reason, you must remember that the United States is a hegemonic country, very much like China. It doesn't like sharing power. For all its partnerships and relationships and NATO and all the other things that it has, the Quad, the United States doesn't like the idea of a world with more than one superpower. It's allergic to that. And there's nothing wrong with that. The United States, post-World War II, has always seen itself as the preeminent power, the leader of the free world, so to say, the destroyer of communism, and the upholder of all things great and free and beautiful. And therefore, as these power orders shift in the world, especially in the last 10 to 15 years, 20 years actually, as far as India is concerned, not only have relations between India and the United States emerged dramatically, but there has been a recognition, even from India's friends, that India is not that, poor developing nation burdened by its enormous population and poverty and people who shit on the railway tracks. This is a country that has very much come into its own. This is a country to be reckoned with. This is a country to be gained from. This is a country that keeps its word. This is a country that can really spoil your day if you mess with it. And therefore, all these things mean that the United States has needed to, or felt the need to, maintain strategic assets against India as well. I personally see this, and again, I mean it when I say I don't mean this as a kind of chest thumping exit route, but I actually see this as a validation. I see this as an affirmation of India's rise. If a country as powerful as the United States needs to weaponize a clown like a Gurpatwant Singh Pannun and go public against a country like India, a country with which you have billions of dollars in a trade with, a blossoming defense relationship, that it means that there is somebody or something that's very insecure in the American system as far as how India is rising. Look at Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. It pains me even to take his name, because you use the exact right word for it, Dave, which is he's ludicrous. He's a caricature. He's a cartoonish clown issuing stupid threats of, putting graffiti on walls. He's tried to make himself more important by threatening airliners because he knows that he will get an emotional response from India. And we, of course, in India have given him that importance. But boil all the media attention away and he's a clown. So if you cut to the bone on this issue, the United States has activated a caricature on an emotive issue for India, which has been something that India has rightfully been very sensitive about, militancy in Punjab, Khalistan, etc. But the very fact that they've weaponized that, gone to the Department of Justice, made it a case against India, is like you rightly said, something that could have been easily sorted out behind closed doors, but they made a tamasha out of it. Because it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't like, that was the only way to go. There was obviously a message in it. The Biden administration, which is not particularly, fond of the Modi government. The Democrats haven't really been fond of the Modi government. Let's call a spade a spade. Found an opportunity to embarrass and sort of pressure and corner the Indian government on an issue that was, let's face it, quite delicate. Yep. An assassin abroad, intelligence agencies involved. This is the kind of stuff nobody wants to talk about. So here you have a superpower trying to corner India on an issue where it's difficult for any elected government to come on the record about. And yet there are all these reasons that come to mind when you think of why the United States has acted in this ludicrous way with India's relationship with Russia, India's relationship with Iran, India's uniquely, and we've spoken about this before, India's unique position as a country that is able to forget about walking a tightrope. I don't think India walks a tightrope at all. India actually strides very confidently in its independent foreign policy, where it can speak with equal rigor, with equal substance, both with the United States and Russia, with both Putin and Zelensky, with both Netanyahu and the Palestinian authorities, with both the Israeli leadership as well as the Iranian leadership. And that is something that the United States doesn't understand. The United States doesn't like, and I detest the word non-aligned, because India is not non-aligned. India is India-aligned. Yep. India is India's foreign policy, and this is not the preserve of the Modi government. This is of all previous governments. Definitely the Manmohan Singh government before that, definitely the Vajpayee government before that, definitely the Narasimha Rao government before that as well, which is that, and all the other smaller governments that came in between, which is that Indian foreign policy has been India aligned. It is a tribute to all of our prime ministers and all of our governments in the past that India has been able to maintain an incredible amount of autonomy and continuity in its foreign policy. And I think that reached some kind of a breaking point post the Russia-Ukraine war, where the United States felt like we need to do something to send India a signal that this level of independence is not acceptable to us. and therefore we need to poke them a little bit. That is my assessment of it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because it's been quite obvious, like you said, that the US has been a bit unhappy with how India has positioned itself when it comes to Russia, Ukraine especially. We can recall that whole G20 summit which was held in New Delhi, and how it took, like, it was literally the last minute when that agreement, sort of, not agreement, the final statement, so to speak, was negotiated. And also it was, this attitude, I think is best exemplified by what President Bush once had said, that you are either with us or against us. I mean, there's no other ground for you.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. So now to the topic of the day. That was the context of why we are discussing what we are discussing. Before we come back again to this alleged plot in the first place, let's talk about the world of intelligence and what it's really about, and what does a day job for a normal intelligence, whether it's RAW or IB. We'll mostly focus on RAW IB. There are also other agencies. There's the NTRO. There's military intelligence, but when we talk about intelligence in India, you mostly think of IB and RAW. IB looks after the intelligence of India's internal security, while RAW looks after the external intelligence, is what people broadly know. RAW doesn't exist on paper, by the way. That name is just something that is used, but there is no official, I think, government document that will ever tell you that there's an agency called RAW that exists, which is an analysis wing. It actually falls under, it's called Cabinet Secretariat. And the chief of RAW is actually a secretary of the government of India, and he's a secretary, research, doing some research in some place somewhere. So I want to understand what's, like I said, a day job of an intelligency, and kind of bust this myth of this swashbuckling six-pack ab agents roaming around the world with guns and just like carrying out covert. I mean, covert operations do happen, and we'll talk about that as well on this episode. But I'm talking about the actual mundane task of gathering intelligence. And this was kind of this whole the picture of what it actually is like was broken to me by my previous boss, one of my previous bosses, Akar Patel, around I think 15 years ago, when he recounted a story when he was in Afghanistan covering the war. The US had just invaded, I think, Afghanistan back then, and he had met a couple of RAW agents and RAW officers, and he told me that they were your middle-aged uncles, basically. They weren't, you can't look at them and be like, he must be an intelligence agency. He's like a normal Indian uncle, pot-bellied, and that's how they actually are, like, in real life, because they need to blend in. They need to just talk to people. They need to kind of cultivate a network, and that can't happen if you're going to be standing out in the crowd. So that was just one example, and and since then I've been reading more and more about this. So tell us, Shiv, what is it like for intelligence on a daily basis? What goes on when it comes to intelligence gathering, and the very, very crucial aspect of analyzing it?
Very much like how journalists are depicted on film, where they amazingly project us and show us as having these very glamorous lives where someone in power is constantly pursuing us, and our phones are tapped, and our lives are constantly in danger, and we are eternally witness to life-changing events, and running out of burning buildings, and having whispering voices call us in the middle of the night to give us government-changing information. Obviously, that may be a small little decimal part of some journalists' lives, but it certainly isn't every journalist's life. Similarly, with the intelligence officials and even spies, even people at the sort of razor's cutting edge of the intelligence profession, about 99.99% of it is totally mundane. It's totally mundane. You can't blame Bollywood and Hollywood and all the other woods for only focusing on the glamorous, dangerous, dark aspects of both these professions. But it has always occurred to me that intelligence agents are depicted the very same way that journalists are depicted on camera, except that in Bollywood, journalists are always also depicted as liars and frauds, in addition to many other things, which again, we've got a lot of liars and frauds in our community, but come on, man, that's not all of us. So so I wouldn't blame them too much. It's nice to think of the intelligence community. I'm not going to take this away from the public as a bunch of tigers and James Bonds and those kinds of things, but that's a extremely inadequate and exponentially inadequate understanding of what intelligence really means and what the day in the life of an intelligence agent is going to be. First of all, we've got to accept, even if unhappily, that most intelligence work is, it's filing cabinets and, work at a computer and, very, very mundane everyday tasks and a huge amount of kagas and paperwork and stuff. Very, very little intelligence work is genuinely, people facing, field work. And therefore, one has to understand that the day in the life of an intelligence agent could be vastly different depending on what that person, that man or woman's role actually is. It could be everything from a person simply analyzing documents that come out of a country, sitting at a computer for 14 to 15 hours a day, simply looking at official documents coming out from another country. And I'm simplifying this obviously for paucity of time, to a person who's just looking at imagery analysis day in and day out, trying to find tiny little bits of vulnerabilities in other countries. It could be a person sitting, it could be a woman sitting on a computer looking at financial transactions of, key persons in another country and just poring over them to try and find something that could provide India with leverage against that person. It could be a person looking at, property transactions. It could be a person looking at satellite imagery. It could be a person doing none of these things. And I have named, the things I've named are borderline exciting, but most of the other work is babugiri, it's bureaucratic, it's unexciting, mundane stuff, but it's very, very necessary because intelligence agencies are big, lumbering, beast-like organizations. They are hugely, manned and womaned. The delicate nature of the work that they do means that every single task needs to be very carefully designed and allocated, and therefore it needs to be done in that kind of way. And it's not something that's specific to India. It's specific to all countries in the world that have large intelligence agencies. IB, since you mentioned IB and RAW, let's focus on them. IB has a very clear remit, which is internal security, internal intelligence. The research and analysis wing, like you said, the cabinet secretariat guys, is basically India's external intelligence agency. There are a bunch of other agencies in the middle who do all kinds of work. There are raw officials or IB officials who are stationed in India's high commissions or embassies abroad. This is not a secret. This is normal. Just like there will be a CIA man in the US embassy here or an MI5, MI6 guy in the British High Commission in India. Intelligence is accepted as part of sort of your ambassadorships and when you have a mission in another country, it is an open secret that part of why you have a mission in another country is you're going to have the ability to use that high commission or that ambassador, that embassy as a listening post or an outpost to gather intelligence about that country. That's the nature of the game. But day in the life, like I said, I mean, to cut a long story short, it would be a very, very small part of it. And for very, very small moments in time, would it actually be six-pack abs and sniper rifles and wearing hoodies and trying to blend into a crowd and finding people? That's got to be like mathematics can't define what a small part of intelligence that would be.
Yeah, right. I wanted to also talk about on this line this term that comes up very often when thankfully we haven't had a major terror attacks in the last many years. But anytime there's a big lapse of security and there is an attack or there's something that happens is the word actionable intelligence. Yeah. Because I think for most people, when you say intelligence or when you say intelligence report, they sort of expect that it would be like the full कि exactly इतने बजे इतने सेकंड पे ये बंदा वहां से निकल के ऐसा करने वाला है. Does it actually happen like that? Like for example, let's talk about 26/11. Let's talk about the Pulwama attack. Let's talk about the China standoff. Are you gonna get that specific? Like, oh, China is moving exactly 45,700 troops from this particular junction to this particular junction at so-and-so time on so-and-so day. Or it can be very vague. So what does intelligence actually look like when it comes to the end user? It could be the local police, it could be the Indian military, Indian Army, Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, or some other department that needs to act up. It could even be the customs department for all we know when it comes to airports. So when it comes to the end user, what sort of reports do they get? And this term actionable intelligence, what is it all about?
At RAW, at the Intelligence Bureau, Dev, at the NTRO, at military intelligence, all of these organizations receive or generate thousands and lakhs of intelligence inputs on a daily basis. Okay, huge swarms of intelligence inputs come in to these organizations, and these organizations have vast numbers of what are called analysts, research analysts, information analysts, which is why research and analysis wing is, most people laugh at that name saying it's such a harmless, sober name, but it's actually totally bloody true, because most of the time, organizations like RAW, certainly the CIA, MI6 sounds really sexy, but it's full of research and analysis people as well. At least RAW is honest about what it does. Are people trained to take all those copious amounts of information and inputs and to find a needle in a haystack, give it some kind of definition, distill what you called actionable intelligence out of it, find patterns, see if you can connect one piece of intelligence with another piece of intelligence from a different day, from a different place, to see if there's a larger actionable input that can be generated from it. This is what intelligence agencies do. They are constantly, think of them like these huge machines where you've got swarms of material constantly going in, and there's a finished product that needs to come out. Most of it is rubbish and being thrown out from a side hole. But from the front, very, very occasionally, small little bits of finished product will come out. And that finished product is actionable intelligence. And what does actionable intelligence mean? Not some broad input. My favorite broad intelligence always input is what comes during the Republic Day parade. Possibility of paragliders and drones and human hang gliders attacking people at Rajpath or Kartavya Path during Republic Day. Every year the same damn input comes in, because intelligence agencies also issue intelligence alerts as safety. And this is not restricted to India. It's all over the world. These safety inputs are issued during big days or big events as a kind of thing saying, see, and then if something happens, they can say, see, I told you. And then it becomes a kind of tutu meme, or like, what do I do with this intelligence, man? It should have been more actionable, where that word comes in. 3 guys with hang gliders have been spotted near Kashmiri Gate, and they're living in this lane. And they were seen practicing in this Maidan, and it looks like they will attack on Republic Day, because from Kashmiri Gate till Kartavya Path is only 4 kilometers, and they've been practicing that distance here. That would be actionable intelligence. Not, boss, keep your eyes trained on the sky. Kuch bhi ho sakta hai. That's not intelligence. So the nature of actionable intelligence is difficult when you zoom out. You mentioned China. You've heard many experts say that the enormous Chinese deployment along the line of actual control in Eastern Ladakh was a intelligence failure. In my view, intelligence failure may have been one aspect of it, but I actually call it systemic failure, because, like you said, how do you miss something like 50 or 60,000 Chinese troops making unusual movements very close to your border? That's not an intelligence failure. That's blindness, right? So that I would call as a system failure. But intelligence failures would be something like Pulwama. What happened in Pulwama? Definitely. What happened in Pathankot? Definitely. Yes. What happened in Uri? Definitely. But again, it's easy to... And at the same time, even though these were technically intelligence failures, we also must acknowledge that intelligence failures can happen at any time, because how much can you possibly guard? How many eyes can you actually keep on every single movement? The Uri attack was caused by 2 terrorists. Yep. 2 guys. The Pulwama attack was caused by one guy in a car. Are you going to be able to keep eyes on everything? So it's easy to say intelligence failure, but one must also qualify what intelligence failure means in that instance. So the entire point of intelligence agencies, their very, their core function is to give India's executive agencies, security agencies, Army, Navy, Air Force, whoever, if it's timely, actionable intelligence, it can prevent a terror attack. If it's timely, actionable intelligence, like the Rashtriya Rifles units in Jammu and Kashmir constantly get actionable intelligence because they've got guys on the ground literally seeing what's happening. That's actionable intelligence. It's like 3 bande hain sir ghar mein abhi. 3 bande hain aur ek parivar bhi hai andar. That's actionable intelligence. So they'll know that they can go there, but they've got to be careful with firing because there's a family inside. So actionable intelligence is a utopian ideal. It comes very, very rarely. Usually when it does come, you will never hear about it because something has been prevented.
Yes.
Or somebody has been prevented from doing something harmful to the country. But that is the very core of what intelligence agencies work for.
Yeah, right. We'll talk about covert operations a bit, and especially questions that have been raised recently when it comes to that aspect, but after a quick break.
When Kamala Harris tried to other Trump, saying that othering him, saying that he is not us. America is not this. Look what he just said. This is not. To all of them, I say, this is America. You are America, and America is Trump.
What
and
a
Trump
valid
is
point.
America.
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember somebody was telling on the podcast itself that the main player in this entire election was Joe Biden, because
He did her in.
Yeah, because of like the Democrats, Joe Biden being the face, Kamala Harris being the next face. They just like, there were comparisons also made, like, for example, take Congress here in India. Democrats have allowed the Republicans to thrive, and that's why Joe Biden was the main player.
Even immigrants have voted Trump.
Yes.
Because they are also against illegal immigration.
Yes.
The moment he shifted conversation from immigration being the issue, that we will not let outsiders in, to saying, no, we will let bright outsiders in who will contribute to the American economy, but we are not okay with illegal immigrants. The entire story changed. Look at the Indian Americans. I spoke with Indian Americans there who are registered Democratic voters, and they were voting Trump this time, and they said it openly to me, saying that, well, I'm a registered Democratic voter, but I'm voting Trump this time. If an Indian ever entered America, they would always be Democrats, because Democrats were the ones who were welcoming of outsiders.
Yes.
But now the tide has changed, because now it is not immigration, it's about immigrants and illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
And there, the divide has been created by the Trump camp.
That's what
They have othered the illegals.
Yeah.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing India's intelligence agencies, rather the actual task of intelligence gathering, analyzing, and like you said very correctly, how aptly Raw's nickname is the research analysis wing, which actually is researching and then analyzing it and then kind of disseminating that information to whoever needs it. We'll talk about now covert operations. Again, this term has been made very sexy by films and by books and by TV shows, etc. Every country definitely does covert operations. I think covert operations simply boil down to operations that you just do not want to be associated with. You don't want your name as a country to be dragged into it. It could be maybe some people could call it unethical. It could be very ethical as well. I would say something like a terror attack against India would be the ISI's definition of a covert operation, for example. For them, 26/11 probably was a covert operation. For us, it was a terrorist attack, but for them, it was a covert operation. They try to do something that without being caught on record trying to do it. Though there have been enough evidences and proof to link Pakistan's deep state to that particular attack. Before we talk about this whole Pannun plot and the so-called covert operation launched and the questions that have been raised about this, just one quick sort of a tangential point especially about Pakistan and RAW and covert operations over there. I've been always meaning to ask this to somebody who's been covering the world of defense. Is the controversial time under then Prime Minister IK Gujral, who apparently asked RAW to completely wind down all its covert operations in Pakistan, because he believed that, we should be friends with Pakistan, we shouldn't be doing this dirty business of spying on them and carrying out offensive covert operations behind enemy lines. So apparently RAW was asked to bring all its agents back, etc, etc, etc. Ironically, this happened just months before the Kargil war, when the intelligence agencies were accused of of intelligence failure. Oh my god, you could not tell us that Pakistan army was climbing those heights and occupying our posts. Don't want to get into Kargil obviously, and whether there was a failure or not. That again is, like you have previously said in one of our previous episodes, a large systematic failure. But that controversial order by then Prime Minister IK Gujral, do you think that really set RAW back many years, and do those effects still remain till this date?
Most certainly. It did have an effect on RAW. Many RAW chiefs in their retirement have either spoken about it or written about it as well. But I have a slightly complex view on this. We've got to remember, Dave, that the world of intelligence has no room for a word that you just used: ethics, morality. This is a grey, slightly bloodless, soulless kind of world where where there's no room for anyone having a moral compass. What guides intelligence operations are national interest, a country's interest, and very frequently those could be extremely unethical and immoral. And I'm not leaving India out of that as well. Okay, so this is the nature of intelligence. No country can claim to have a moral or ethical intelligence agency, because that's not their remit. That's point number one. Point number two, when Inder Kumar Gujral as Prime Minister, in this spasm of Aman Ki Asha, quote unquote recalled or scrapped RAW's external covert operations activity, it was in my view, a monumental faux pas, because this is a world that enjoys something called plausible deniability. Yep. By scrapping something, you are acknowledging it. By claiming to recall RAW agents from any other country, you are shining a light where you shouldn't be shining a light at all. You are basically telling the world, yes, we have agents in all these places, and yes, they conduct covert operations. Now, Inder Kumar Gujral, he was Prime Minister in the late 90s at a time when, I don't want to be too harsh on him, because there's, of course, a political context to what he was trying to do. But it was one of the grand examples of political interference in security apparatus that has harmed India. And there have been actions of that kind to come later as well, which we will discuss later. But the fun aspect, if I can even use the word fun in this subject, is that the very nature of plausible deniability also means that when you talk about recalling RAW agents or scrapping a covert operations program in Pakistan or other countries, how do you prove that you've actually done it? Plausible deniability means that you're saying it. There's political heft behind the confirmation that yes, we are scrapping it from a systemic level. But the nature of what you're talking about is grey and unfixed and unfixable, and you can't hold it in your hands, and you can't identify who those covert operations agents are, and you can't point at some pot-bellied uncle, like you said, and say, wo RAW agent hai, usko wapas bulao. You can't do it because it's a stadium of ghosts. So I sometimes like to think maybe Inder Kumar Gujral was playing a bit of a game, but he was a good man. I think his intentions were good. He didn't intend to harm India's intelligence agencies. But when you have someone like a Prime Minister acknowledge and indicate that this is going to happen, you are basically pushing what is meant to be a grey area into the sunlight. And RAW and IB don't want the sunlight. Nobody wants sunlight. Like you said, they're not supposed to exist so much on paper. Yep. Cabinet Secretariat, Research and Analysis Wing. Why are we talking about all this, So that became a big issue. I remember I was in high school at that time, and I remember reading about it. I thought, what's going on? Even then I understood why are they even talking about it? You're supposed to be talking about this stuff in whispers, and here's the Prime Minister talking about it openly. So I think it's a bit of a non-issue in my view, that you've done something, but has it really made a difference? I mean, are we really kidding ourselves to say that because of Inder Kumar Gujral, the Raw wound up all its operations in all other countries? True. Is it like, chalo, bhaiya, please pack your suitcase, we've got to get out because the Prime Minister has called us back? That's not how the intelligence community works. Not even for a country like India. Okay, and this brings us to the slightly more dangerous aspect of it. The obvious corollary question would be to say, Shiv, are you trying to say that intelligence agencies function outside the remit of the Prime Minister's office? They don't take commands from the Prime Minister's office, that they don't answer to Parliament, they don't answer to the executive authority and sovereignty of a country, they function by themselves? A part of it does. I'm sorry if that keeps you awake at night, but a part of it does. And it is not something that is confined to India. Intelligence agencies do have a strain and a layer of autonomy. You can chest thump and call it rogue. You can say, they do, these are free agents doing their own thing and embarrassing India. You can say whatever you want. But there is a layer and there is an element of all intelligence agencies that just function by themselves. Yeah. Because what compels them, what fuels them, is their core function, and they are aware of the politics of how they may be handled. So that's my view on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a bit like, tomorrow your boss tells you, Shiv, from tomorrow you will not be covering the world of defense. But that doesn't mean you're going to break all your sources. You're not going to break all your contact with all your sources. You're going to still talk to them. Yeah. You might not do the reporting that you are normally doing. You might not air as many shows on the world of defense as you do. Maybe you might not do this podcast anymore. But you'll definitely meet them. You'll definitely have a chat with them once in a while. And you'll definitely be getting that information, right? So, guessing it's something like that. Right. So talking about the Pannun plot and the questions that have been raised, especially to do with the Raw's capabilities and spycraft, so to speak. A couple of pieces I read a week ago. One was by Shekhar Gupta and the other was by Praveen Swami, who's been covering the world of national security for a very long time. Both were very interesting pieces, and they raise this one good question about let's forget, like you said, the morality, the ethics of it, because this is a world that does not really has no place for such terms and such emotions. But if you were to just look at the plot as is, because India, by the way, very interestingly, has not denied many of the reporting that has been done by US media or any of the allegations put out by Department of Justice. They've said we are cooperating with them and it's between us and them and we are doing it, that's it. And in the world of diplomacy, we know how important non-denials at times can be. So even though the two of us do not know the facts exactly, but we can kind of go by what's been reported in the US media and what has been alleged by the US Department of Justice, is that there was an operative in Delhi who contacted this guy called Nikhil Gupta, who's some international gangster, who in turn contacted somebody he thought was someone who could help him hire a gunman in the US. But that somebody was actually a DA informant. DA is the US's drug enforcement agency. That informant told his handler, who then kind of arranged an undercover agent posing as that gunman to meet or I think contact Nikhil Gupta. And he was given $15,000, if I'm not wrong, in cash. And there are photos that were put out by US media about that. That operative in India has been named Vikash Yadav by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who has put out wanted posters for him as well. This is what we know from US media, from what the US Department of Justice has said. Now, what I want to talk to you about is this question of spycraft and this question of even if you're doing covert operations, do you have that wherewithal? Do you have that high skill set? Because you're going up against the US. It's not some other country. The US is supposed to be the master at, counterintelligence, at encryption, at, communication, stuff like that. What we know from US media is some of the conversations that happened were over messaging platforms like Telegram. They're supposed to be safe, but come on, in today's day and age, stuff like this is not safe. So these questions have been raised, not maybe very public, not it very fully, but because this is a podcast about the world of defense, I want to ask you that question. Do you think this plot does raise this worry of, perhaps officers or officials within RAW or even maybe the IB not having that great skill set of being able to carry out covert operations?
It's quite possible. It's most definitely possible, and there is one narrative that appears to be pushing that point very, very hard. That the RAW has been ham-handed. They've executed this in a very cartoonish way. That the nature of the WhatsApp texts and the instructions and the money involved and the fact that they were speaking to a DEA agent, for God's sake, in the United States shows a level of amateurishness in executing what was ultimately a very, very delicate operation against, like you rightly pointed out, the United States. The big dada of intelligence, counterintelligence, message interception. The National Security Agency in the United States is basically this kind of all-seeing eye, right? It's as Edward Snowden revealed, it's an agency that is in real time reading messages of pretty much everyone that they want to, and they know in real time exactly what's happening in their country. But my submission has always remained that the Pannu issue was brought to the surface for a reason, for a diplomatic, strategic reason, as far as India is concerned, because the United States basically risked a great deal of bilateral goodwill with an important country like India on this particular issue. It's an issue that kind of inflamed a large part of India's middle class, who was looking at this story and saying, hey, hello, what's going on, right? And the middle class is very important for India-US relations, because it's the middle class that fuels, a large part of, the American tech economy. And people are wondering why this actually happened. So I've already told you why I think the United States did it. But if you're asking me whether what the US said happened, we don't know, and we won't know.
We won't.
Okay, we won't know. And I'm not trying to chicken out of an answer, but all I'm saying is we don't know. There could be other missing pieces of this entire puzzle that were not shown in this Department of Justice case, which could turn the picture around completely, which is what I'm saying. That's the nature of intelligence, where there's a cat and mouse going on, but sometimes you don't see the dog in the picture. Yeah. Okay. So I would just say that I don't think we know all the pieces of this story yet. Is it possible that the RAW was extremely, ham-handed and amateurish and, botched up this operation and ended up looking like fools? Very possible. If you look at the pieces that have come out so far of this puzzle, that's certainly how it looks. But again, I would leave room for, I think we need to zoom out and see who else is part of this chess game right now. And I think my suspicion is that the RAW is not a ham-handed organization. Like I said, it was an operation that could have been easily handled quietly between the two countries. The United States has had agents in India who've been spooked and exposed by Indian counterintelligence. Ravinder Singh, who was whisked away to Nepal and then to the United States and continues to live there, I think, or he's dead. So it's not like the United States is clean in this aspect. They've had people here. We've had people there. I'm sure India has had many more covert operations and, intelligence activity in the United States that either has gone undetected or is not brought to the surface. So it brings me back to the point, which is that, the United States has an interest in the world looking at this as a ham-handed Indian operation, as an irresponsible India thinking it's become too big for its boots and, hiring foreign assassins to settle scores with India's enemies in those countries. So it's possible, but I don't think that's the real issue. I think the way India's handled this issue so far has made it seem like the United States has bet a great deal of diplomatic goodwill on a guy who's threatening to blow up aircraft. Barely 2 decades after 9/11. A guy who has dual citizenship of the United States and Canada, and threatens consulates in that country. A guy who represents, a sort of non-movement like Khalistani, which has no which has no wide acceptance anywhere apart from a few little neighborhoods in Brampton, Ontario, right? So the world is seeing this as the Biden administration's folly. Even the United States' allies like the UK and Australia, if you saw their statements, they were very skittish about this whole thing. They're like, why is Joe Biden, or Joe Biden is basically a puppet because he's completely lost all his mental faculties. It was the deep state that was doing all of this. And I completely accept that people look at the word deep state and say, deep state is this kind of big amorphous mass which you can blame all of India's problems for. Ye ho raha hai deep state, deep state, deep state. I'm not saying that. I'm saying in this particular case, it made no sense at all. It was a very public diplomatic point that was being made as far as India is concerned because of those things that I mentioned earlier. But I mean, there is always room that amateurishness, ham-handedness, stupidity could have been part of this entire puzzle. I'm sure of it.
Yeah. Because I think we should also not forget that there was also an element of covert operation in this so-called covert operation involved on the US side, by the way. It deployed an undercover agent to kind of reel in Nikhil Gupta so that they could build that. Because if you wanted to be, all that, you could have just shut it from the get-go. You could have told the informant, don't talk to him.
Correct.
Call hai na, baat karna, agli baar call mat ढूंढना. But no, you told him, no,
point
talk to
had
him.
To be made.
Yeah, so exactly. This was also an operation launched by the US to, kind of make a case. Right. Last point on this discussion is something you briefly mentioned when you were talking about IK Gujral. How well does the Indian government, when I say government, I mean the politicians, the civilian setup, and the top bureaucrats, really understand the world of intelligence and what intelligence agencies do and how they are best deployed, best utilized? Because like you said, these are not agencies that are so much in public domain. I mean, if you were to tell me, I know that the Indian government machinery understands the Indian military very well. But the Indian policing system, for example, is flawed at many levels. What is the case with India's intelligence setup? How well are politicians, civilian leaders equipped to kind of deal with them and use them very effectively? I'll give you one example, even though this happened many years ago, decades, Kargil war actually, is that during the war, when the conflict was ongoing, I think RAW or may have been the IB, or military intelligence, I don't remember which agency, they were able to intercept a conversation between then Army Chief of Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf, who was then in China, and his deputy who was sitting in Islamabad or Rawalpindi, sorry. They were able to intercept a phone call that conclusively proved that the Pakistani army was behind the Kargil conflict, because they were talking about operations and stuff like that and briefing then PM Nawaz Sharif, etc. The Indian government of the day chose to make that call public. There was a proper press conference, if I'm not wrong. I don't remember who it was, but there was a proper press conference held, and either the recording or the transcript at least was made public, told the world. I think it was done in a way to say, see, Pakistan is to blame. But the point is, then that meant that line went cold, because Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf and the army knew, this is being intercepted, so they then probably switched communication channels and we were not able to intercept anything longer. Don't want to delve into that, but that's just an example of what I feel is perhaps something, there was a political decision, perhaps best avoided. You could have done it later, but maybe not in the moment. So that's where I'm coming from when I ask you this question: how well do Indian politicians understand or are able to use intelligence agencies?
Take, for example, what happened in 2016 after the Uri surgical strikes. The army announced it openly. It was a political decision to announce a covert special forces operation across the line of control in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Balakot was publicly announced. It was a covert operation. It was announced. This government has seen sense in being disruptive about the secretive world of covert operations and using it for strategic messaging. So it's not so much about the sort of tactical immediate impact of a bombing of a seminary of the JEM or the killing of 40 Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists by Indian special forces, but about the fact that instead of talking in hushed tones and denying that something happened and leaving the world wondering about did India do something, did India not do something, the Indian government ordered the Indian army to hold a press conference to announce that something like this happened. So that indicates to you that there is an understanding of what the value of covert operations are in the sort of strategic political messaging space. Now, the broader question about how well do Indian politicians understand intelligence agencies, how to use them, what their worth is, where the cracks are. I think there's good and bad. One of my big concerns has always been that sensitive issues in this country are, and I won't use the word politicized, because I believe in a democracy when issues are politicized, that's a good thing. It means that it's up for conversation. It's up for democratic scrutiny. So I don't believe that. But I think there is a great deal of stupidity. There's a great deal of inconsistent knowledge. There's a great deal of politicians using half-baked information in order to score political points when it comes to China, when it comes to Pulwama, when it comes to Balakot. Some television channels, call it the Saboot gang, asking for proof and things like that. All that is okay, but I think it's representative of a larger kind of malaise in our democracy, one of many, which is that the line between seeking accountability, which is a good thing, and shining the light where it's meant to be shined is a good thing, and harming security and intelligence operations for very, very short-term political goals or being able to embarrass the government are concerned. And I think that comes from a culture of appreciating and understanding what security and intelligence agencies actually do, which is, despite all the mundaneness that I described, is essentially a delicate, dangerous job which has a direct bearing on India's sovereignty or whichever country we're talking about. And that culture is not there. That culture is there in the United States.
Yep.
That culture is very much there in a country like France. That culture is by and large there in the United Kingdom, where there's a kind of bipartisan, a non-juvenile bipartisanship on core issues of national security, on core issues of intelligence. Iske bare mein hum nahi puchenge because we understand it's sensitive. We'll be with the government on this. And please don't mistake me at all. I'm not saying that politicians should shut up and stop questioning the security agencies. Not at all. I believe there should be even greater oversight over agencies like RAW and NTRO and IB, because ultimately it's taxpayers' money that's being used, and they should be answerable when there are intelligence failures, and they should be most certainly pulled up when India comes under attack. But I'm saying that there needs to be a greater degree of political understanding at the party level, at the individual level, at the campaign election level over is this really the issue that we want to go with? Yep. Is this really the kind of thing that we want to, spend our resources on and capture national attention with? The Rafale scam is a fine example. I mentioned it the last time as well. Now, I don't know whether something really happened or not, but the very fact that the Congress party has sort of abandoned that issue shows you that it was raised for political reasons. If it was such a national security issue that Rahul Gandhi thought, so doggedly about and with so much commitment, then why is he no longer pursuing it with the same amount of intensity? That's what I mean. Don't pick up national security and intelligence issues for small-term political reasons. By all means, pick them up for political reasons if they reflect a greater understanding that talking about them, scrutinizing them, dissecting them, debating them in parliament and in the public sphere will actually mean a better national security scenario for the country. That culture doesn't exist in India yet. We're a far distance away from it.
Yeah. But I'm glad at least that hasn't happened yet with the Pannun plot controversy. I mean, you don't really have the opposition kind of...
I'm surprised, frankly, that it hasn't happened.
Let's not give them ideas. That should happen. Right, we'll end this episode on that note. One final quick departing question. Since we're talking about the sexy world, by the way, this episode has made the sexy world quite unsexy. If you were to compare the other podcasters
Believe me,
out there.
the intelligence agency could be happy that we focused on the unsexy part because that's most of it.
Yeah. Because the other podcasters out there, I have many of these this episodes talking about the sexy part of it, but we kind of really avoid it because you don't talk the realities honestly. So that's where we are at. But so on this topic, then your favorite spy show or movie that you watched?
Well, Homeland has been a very a show that I've loved a great deal because I think that was a realistic depiction of what the gray areas of intelligence are, about double agents, about infiltration, about Iraq and Syria and the CIA. So I loved that show a great deal. In terms of books, Tom Clancy, any Tom Clancy book, the Spy Cell series, continue to be my favorites as far as espionage and covert operations are concerned.
I'd go with John le Carre for books and TV show. I don't know if you watched it, and you must if you haven't. It's The Americans.
I have.
It's a fantastic show. So cool. We'll end it there, and I wonder if this episode is going to come up in Raw's research because of the keywords our producer and I will be putting in the show description. So thanks, Shiv. Fun chat. And I quite liked the whole making it unsexy because I think that's really something that I found very interesting, and I hope our listeners and viewers, and I know our listeners and viewers actually will. Thanks as always to our producer Anna Priyadarshini and to all our listeners and viewers. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.